Bienvenidos a Que Pasa St. Lucie. Este programa es traído a ustedes a través del superintendente de las Escuelas Públicas, el doctor John Prince, y la directora de comunicación, la señora Lydia Martin. Soy su servidora de ustedes. Mi nombre es Linda Tapia. El día de hoy, padres de familia, tenemos un invitado, un experto con el nuevo sistema de pruebas que ha reemplazado al examen que tenías antes con las siglas FSA, que vienen siendo evaluaciones de estándares del estado de la Florida. Antes era FSA, ahora tenemos un nuevo sistema de prueba. Padres de familia, les pido que tengan con qué anotar para que noten la información, para que reciban esa información concreta y sólida. Y estén mejor preparados para que puedan ayudar a sus hijos con los preparativos para este monitoreo de progresos que tenemos. Con eso los dejo para poder recibir a nuestro invitado de honor el día de hoy. Vamos a tomar en porciones porque voy a hacerle traducciones en español. Va a hablar inglés, luego yo se los voy a explicar en español en breve. Ténganos un poquito de paciencia, pero manténganse aquí con nosotros en Que Pasa St. Lucie. Bienvenido, Dr. Ocampo.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm awesome. Can you share a little bit about you?
Sure. I started in education 27 years ago. I started as a teacher, of course. I was a special education teacher. I became a guidance counselor. And shortly afterwards, I found myself in the role as an assistant principal. I worked at several schools as an assistant principal, and then I took on the huge challenge of becoming a principal. I started off in elementary.
You've done it all.
I've done it all. I started off as an elementary principal, then middle school principal, and then I was the principal of 2 different high schools. In one of my roles in St. Lucie County, I supervised 12 different schools, and now I find myself in my current position for this last year as the Executive Director of Assessment and Accountability.
En breve y en resumen, tiene 27 años de experiencia en educación. ¡Wow! Muchísima experiencia que trae el doctor Ocampo aquí a la mesa, aquí al distrito escolar, que impacta lo que él hace a la educación de sus hijos. Ha sido maestro especial con niños con discapacidades, ha sido consejero de estudiantes, ha sido asistente director y director de 2 diferentes escuelas. Ahora se encuentra, años para atrás estuvo él supervisando 12 diferentes escuelas de aquí de St. Lucie, donde colaboran con los directores de las escuelas, los empleados, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces, este año se presenta en su nuevo título de Director Ejecutivo de Evaluación y Rendición de Cuentas o Responsabilidad, como quieran entender eso. Doctor Ocampo, tenemos mucho de qué hablar de este nuevo sistema de pruebas. Dr. Ocampo, I know we have a lot to talk about.
We do.
This new system that's coming up that parents are asking, okay, well, if it's not FSA, what is it? What are we doing? What are our kids being prepared for?
Okay. Well, I came into this position in an interesting year because, as you stated, this is a new test for everybody in the state of Florida. So the new test, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to a PowerPoint that I have.
Perfect.
Because the
much
PowerPoint is something that I used a few weeks ago at a presentation with parents here at the district office.
Awesome. All right. Let's go for it.
So I'm going to give you a little bit about the history of what we call FAST testing, which is the Florida Assessment of Student Thinking. So last year, just only a year ago this month, Governor Ron DeSantis decided that he was going to replace what was then the FSA with a new model. And the new model would take over testing for ELA, which we call English Language Arts, we call it ELA, and mathematics.
Bueno, aproximadamente hace un año, el gobernador Ron DeSantis del estado de la Florida implementó el nuevo sistema que está reemplazando el examen FSA en las áreas de inglés, lenguaje, artes y matemáticas, que ahora se llama Evaluación de Pensamiento Estudiantil de Florida y las siglas son FAST, que viene siendo FAST.
So although Florida has had standardized testing for 25 years, this was the first time that we were going to be using a model which is slightly different than the model that we've had for the last 24 years. So I'm going to go into some of the differences in this model,
perfect.
okay? So the new testing, okay, is for VPK all the way through 10th grade, whereas in the past, it was only for 3rd grade through 10th grade. So we added those grade levels,
a difference.
VPK, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, which is a difference, and something that a lot of parents hadn't seen before, and they weren't used to that. So right away, they had questions like, why all of a sudden is this happening? And keep in mind that this isn't something that the school is doing or the district is doing, something that everyone in the state is doing at the same time, and especially new for kindergarten through 2nd grade. I think that 3rd through 10th grade, they were used to testing for a while. They're not quite used to the testing that has been done now following the new model, but it was something that was part of what they just did.
Bueno, antes con el breve examen que el FSA, los grados de nivel que estaban tomando estas pruebas era del grado 3º al grado 10º. El grado 3º al 10º. Algo nuevo que implementaron con este nuevo sistema es estudiantes del grado de 4 años, que es el VPK, al grado 2º. También serán parte de este nuevo sistema de pruebas, de monitoreo de pruebas. Ahora, esto no es algo que se está haciendo solamente aquí en el Distrito Escolar de St. Lucie. No, esto es algo que es implementado en todo el estado de la Florida. Esto es algo que muchos padres nunca nos hubiéramos imaginado, que empezaran a administrar pruebas a menor de 3er grado, pero esto es algo nuevo que se está introduciendo a ustedes también, padres de familia.
So one of the first differences that we're going to find is that this test across VPK all the way through 10th grade is computer-based testing. So computer-based testing is very different than the type of tests that I've been used to for many years, because we used to basically have, for the most part, have paper-based testing.
Correct.
Okay, so paper-based testing, if you remember, you would have your test, you'd have your number 2 pencil, you'd have your grid sheet, and you would grid in your answers. The test would then be collected, and the grid answer sheet would be sent into the state for the results, and would take a long period of time to get those results, because you had to collect the materials, send it to the state would have to process them, and then you'd get your results many weeks later. So that's the first change.
Una de las primeras partes que ha habido cambio es de que años anteriores siempre ha sido la prueba administrada en papel, donde te dan tu libreta para tomar el examen, responder, y luego te dan tu hoja donde tú le estás marcando esas palomitas que decimos para poder responder a la pregunta. Entonces ahora, eso es algo que nosotros estamos acostumbrados en nuestros tiempos de nosotros, ahora ya no. Ahora todo es basado a través del aparato electrónico que viene siendo una computadora o una laptop. So ahora es como se va a administrar estas pruebas de este nuevo sistema.
So one of the other things about having computer-based testing is that every student needs to have a computer to take this test. So one of the things that happened over the last several years is that schools now have a laptop computer for each one of the students. So that was something that...
So parents don't have to go out and buy a computer, a laptop, or anything?
No, parents don't need to buy that at all. They're provided by the school, and every student should have their own laptop. Some schools have a separate room set up for testing, or some schools have other computers inside of the testing room, depending on the grade level and where their students are or how big or small the school is. So some schools may vary differently, or have a kind of like a different testing environment, but for the most part, the wonderful thing for computer-based testing is that every student has their own computer if they need to.
Lo que comentábamos es sobre si el padre de familia tendrá que comprar alguna laptop o algún aparato electrónico. La respuesta es no. Cada una de nuestras escuelas aquí en el Distrito Escolar de St. Lucie tiene una laptop o una computadora que el estudiante va a poder usar para estas pruebas. Ahora, depende en el grado que el estudiante esté, pueda que sea en algún salón pequeño donde tengan las computadoras o aparatos electrónicos como laptop, o como en las high school que cada estudiante tenga su propio laptop o computadora para que puedan hacer estas pruebas en línea.
So I'm going to refer back to what we probably know and our listeners and our viewers know at home, which is the paper-based testing. So when you and I took a paper-based test, there was a series of questions on the test, and we either got the questions right or wrong, right? But with computer-based testing, the computer tests are also computer adaptive. So if a student answers the first question right, well, the computer knows that and starts giving the students a progressively harder questions moving forward until they see the student start to level off and maybe get some of the questions wrong.
Interesting.
And then the computer adaptation kind of levels off. The same can be true if students right away get the questions wrong. So if the students get the questions wrong, then the computer adaptation will cause possibly easier or different types of questions.
Oh, wow, interesting. Ahora, como cuando uno hacía estas pruebas estatales, uno estaba acostumbrado a su libreta y el papel y contestar si las respuestas bien o mal, había tiempo después cuando uno recibía esos resultados. Ahora, al ser esto todo electrónico, basado, si el estudiante empieza a responder sus preguntas correctamente, entonces la computadora se va a adaptar y automáticamente le va a generar preguntas más rigurosas, o sea, más difíciles. Ahora, vámonos al revés. Si el estudiante empieza a responder incorrectamente, tal vez le hagan una pregunta de otra manera o un poquito más fácil. O sea, que la programación de la computadora de este nuevo sistema de pruebas se va a adaptar basado como el estudiante está respondiendo.
Okay. So there are some other differences as well. So I'm going to refer to the PowerPoint. So in the past, the tests from the state, which were paper-based, were done at the very end of the year. So everyone remembers at the very end of the year, sometimes starting in as early as April, because it took a lot of work to get all these paper-based tests out there, sometimes early as April. And we have, of course, we had to get the scores back. The testing season started. Well, now, because they're computer-based, we no longer have such a huge testing window. The testing windows are smaller, but they do happen 3 times a year, okay? So we're moving away from just doing a final test at the very end to find out, you know,
What
at the
the
very
student
end,
learned
what
the
the
whole
student,
school year.
what if the student learned or what they didn't learn the whole school year. Now we do 3 tests, smaller durations for only 1 session per day, but 3 times a year.
Bueno, como anteriormente con las otras pruebas que hemos tenido, todo el tiempo se ha hecho una vez al año. Entonces, toda la presión se pone en ese mes y normalmente es en el mes de abril en adelante. Ahora, con este nuevo sistema de programación, esto es hecho en 3 diferentes etapas. Al principio del año escolar, a mediados y al final del año escolar. Estamos hablando de 3 etapas. So I think it's better for the student because instead of retaining everything for one exam versus doing it in portions 3 times a year, I think the student may be able to perform a little bit better based on that than doing it once a year on one exam.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot of pros, positive things that occur when you test 3 times a year compared with just the 1 time. And especially the way they have the system set up, because, and you may have heard this, we call it PM1, PM2, and PM3. And I know that educators have a lot of acronyms, right? So sometimes it's hard for parents to understand what we are talking about. So PM stands for progress monitoring. So let's look at that word. We're monitoring how well the students are progressing through the first test, the second test, and then the third test. So we can talk a little bit about progress, PM1. Let's talk about progress monitoring 1, which is the first fast test. So it happens in the beginning of the year, and we could refer to the PowerPoint. So at the beginning of the year, you have progress monitoring 1. And that administration occurs right at the very beginning of the year. So what does it do, right? It doesn't wait. We don't wait until the very end of the year to make kind of adjustments
Correct.
in our teaching. So it helps teachers kind of make adjustments along the way. But it gives schools a baseline to see where this student is starting out, right? So we know that a student ends, there's a whole summer that goes by. Some students,
Correct.
come into the school year at different levels. So when they come in, the first thing that we do, okay, is we make sure we get that baseline information, and that baseline information comes to the teachers very quickly. So let's talk about that for a second.
Cuando ustedes escuchan las siglas PM, lo que quiere decir en español es el monitoreo de progreso. Hay uno, monitoreo de progreso número 2, monitoreo de progreso número 3. Ahora, como muchos de nosotros sabemos que nuestros hijos durante el verano se ponen a hacer otras actividades, entonces no estudian, no están practicando, nada de eso. Entonces, al entrar el estudiante en el mes de agosto, lo primero que hacen es administrarle, es monitorear el progreso del estudiante para poder saber en qué nivel está ese estudiante, para así de esta manera la maestra tiene una mejor idea dónde está este estudiante en cada uno de esos temas.
So I mentioned before how now, because it is computer-based, we get the information right away. So in the past, teachers would get the information at the very end of the year, if not sometimes in the summer. And then the following year, we'd get the reports and see where the students ended up. And they would make adjustments to make sure we fill the gaps, and find out what the student learned and what they didn't learn, and make sure that we had, we gave them what they need so they could be successful that following year. Now, okay, because it's computer-based, those students come in at the beginning of the year, they take what we call PM1, Progress Monitoring 1, and within, almost instantaneously, within a day or two, the teachers have all of those results broken down by benchmark, okay? So they know what the student knows, where they might need a little bit of a reteach, so that way they could set them up for success from the beginning of the year.
Hablando sobre los resultados, para mí me parece magnífico de que sea ahora todo basado en computadora, porque uno de los pros que existe es de que ese profesor o profesora va a poder obtener los resultados del monitoreo de progreso del estudiante dentro de un día o dos. De esta manera, la maestra va a evaluar toda la información de todos sus alumnos, saber qué estudiante necesita, por ejemplo, adicional apoyo en alguna materia, o tal vez no lo necesite, pero otros estudiantes tal vez sí. Entonces, de esta manera, ella pueda coordinar mejor su enseñanza a los estudiantes.
Okay, so let's talk about what does PM2, what is that all about, right? Because we know what happens at the very beginning of the year, but now we're in the middle of the year, right? 3 months have now passed. We've passed Thanksgiving holiday and the winter holiday, and here we are back in school in January. Well, guess what? We need to know, okay, if the students have progressed from August, when they took that first test, until the mid-year. So we need to see where the students are academically, if they need any kind of reteach. Maybe they need to go to after-school tutorial. Maybe they need to have a small pull-out group. Maybe they need to have a different resource in the classroom, so that way we can get those students back on track. We can identify which students are progressing, which students aren't progressing as fast, and make those necessary adjustments to their instruction.
Bueno, hablando del monitoreo de progreso 2, esta es una ventanilla que se hace a mediado del año. Si ya los estudiantes ya tuvieron 3 meses en la escuela, ya pasaron las fiestas del pavo, de la Navidad, el Año Nuevo. Ahora vamos a ver dónde están los estudiantes, qué han aprendido, qué ha cambiado del primer monitoreo de progreso que se hizo en agosto, ahora se hace en enero. Entonces, en este momento todavía hay tiempo para que esa maestra pueda identificar cómo está en la parte académica, o tal vez si el estudiante necesita algún tipo de servicio de tutoría, o necesitamos sacar el estudiante para poder trabajar más cercana con ese estudiante o para poder identificar si es de que hay alguna área donde debemos de concentrar más con el estudiante.
So now we have a period of time between PM2, Progress Monitoring 2, and they took that test in January. And keep in mind that these tests are one session, where in the past, when we had state mandated tests, sometimes it took 2 days to do these. So this is great that we're getting this much information in one session. Now, typically the sessions are anywhere from between an hour and 2 hours.
Okay.
However, the students do have, up to the entire day. Okay, so like minimum time is anywhere from an hour to 2 hours for PM1 and 2. However, PM3, we know the times. And for grades 3 through 10, it's 120 minutes. And that's for English language arts. Okay, and then for, and I think I have it written down there. Yeah, there it is. And I'm going to get to it in a little bit. So, there's a set amount of time, but it's for one session only per day. And it's a set amount of time. However, kids could use the extended time of the entire day if they need that extra time in order to take this test.
And that's very important because all the students don't learn or complete their testing all at the same time, so some may need that additional time. So I think that's a plus. Ahora, lo que está pasando en el monitoreo de progreso 3, este es el final. Sería el último de los 3 que se brinda durante el año escolar. Ya hubo en agosto, en enero, y ahora estamos hablando del final. Ahora, con este último evaluación que se les va a hacer, para darles una idea que en la parte de lectura de inglés, lenguaje y de arte, aproximadamente es de 120 minutos. O sea que si el estudiante necesita tiempo adicional para poder terminar la evaluación en la computadora, se le brinde esa oportunidad al estudiante, porque sabemos que no todo estudiante aprende al mismo nivel que los demás. Algunos de nosotros necesitamos más tiempo que otros estudiantes. Esto es magnífico para ese estudiante que necesite ese apoyo adicional.
We talked a little bit about Progress Monitoring 3, and that's what the schools are getting ready for now, to make sure that our students have what they need in order to be successful now on the last assessment. Whereas in the past, we would give the students the test, and now, and pray, right, that they would do well on it because we
put them to bed early
year.
and feed them early, and you be relaxed.
But now we have a really good idea of how those students are going to perform, because not only do we have 2 assessments that kind of gear us or point us in the right direction of what we need, but we've also had the opportunity to teach those students so that way they can perform at their very best once the 3rd test comes around at the end of the school year. So I have here up on the screen the session lengths, because I know there's a lot of different times and I kind of refer to them, but I want to make sure that people aren't confused. So for PM3, the times are set, right? It's 120 minutes for grades 3 through 10 reading, 100 minutes for 3 through 5 math, and 120 minutes for 6 through 8 math. All right, and it was a little bit more than what we had for PM1 and 2. But keep in mind, this is the final test, and because of it, it's going to take a little bit longer, so we can accurately get an understanding of what the students learned throughout the course of the year.
So, en el monitoreo de progreso 1 y 2, para darles una idea, por ejemplo, en lectura, inglés, lenguaje y arte de grados 3 al 10, fueron 90 minutos para el estudiante. Pero como ahora es un poquito más fuerte lo del monitoreo de progreso nivel 3, porque ya se le dio al estudiante más de medio año de aprendizaje, entonces por eso se le agrega más tiempo al estudiante para que esté mejor preparado el estudiante.
And we also have the times up on the screen for those students in pre-K and K through 2nd grade, because they have a much shorter test. We're not going to have a 2nd grader sitting in front of a computer for 120 minutes.
No, of course not.
Right? And they're going to be in small groups working with their teacher. The average test length is 10 to 20 minutes. students need more time for each question, they have more time for each question. But it's really geared to the individual needs of each of the students.
And that's for just VPK or VPK through second?
All the way through second grade.
All the way second. So, para los niños menores del grado VPK al grado segundo, las preguntas son más pequeñas, el tiempo es más pequeño, porque pues claro que los estudiantes no van a mantenerse estable por tanto tiempo comparado a los otros estudiantes de los otros grados. So, por ejemplo, estábamos conversando de que será como de 10 a 20 minutos, o sea, en tiempos breves para esos grados de VPK al grado kinder.
Okay. So, one of the other things that are coming up as we transition, and we've talked a lot about how the scores are getting into the hands of the family, right?
Correct.
Because we talked about scores going to the teachers within sometimes 24 hours. They have the scores and know exactly how the students did on each individual question. But the families also have access to this information as well. So there is, they have access through Skyward. And there's a family portal in Skyward, and that's where they go to get, they used to go, parents are used to going there. When my students were, when my own kids were in school, I would go to family access in Skyward quite often. Well, there's a link there, and it'll take you to the state portal, and it'll show you, give you individual student reports for each student so they can see exactly how their students scored, not just their scale score, but also their levels. And it's quite an in-depth report, and I think that it'll benefit a lot of parents if they went to the Skyward page, clicked into that link to get to the state family portal and get that information on their students.
I wonder if that Skyward is translating to other languages. That's something I need to ask.
Yeah, that's definitely something we need to see.
Padres de familia, comenzábamos sobre que los maestros pueden tener acceso a las respuestas unas dentro de 24 horas. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿cómo es que ustedes padres pueden obtener los resultados de esos mismos evaluaciones que le están haciendo a los estudiantes? Si ustedes tienen acceso a Skyward, si no, pueden pedir la forma en sus escuelas de sus hijos, llenarla, tienen que tener un correo electrónico para que le puedan brindar acceso. El Skyward es el portal familiar del distrito escolar, donde ustedes se pueden comunicar con sus maestros, estar monitoreando lo académico, si sus hijos fueron a la escuela, si no fueron, y poder comunicarse con sus maestros. Allí hay una parte donde ustedes pueden hacerle clic y los puede conectar con el portal del estado de la Florida, y allí les da los resultados de cómo los estudiantes están haciendo en la parte académica con este nuevo sistema de pruebas. Dr. Ocampo, I know there was a lot to cover. I know there's plenty much more, but we're trying to do it in portions for the families so they're able to understand.
I'll happy to come back again.
Yes.
Maybe give you more in-depth information.
Yes, let's see how the results end up this year. Thank
Definitely.
you.
You're very
Thank you
welcome.
for coming. Gracias a ustedes por estar aquí con nosotros en Que Pasa St. Lucie. Gracias al doctor Ocampo que está aquí con nosotros en el distrito escolar. Hasta la próxima.